Welcome to Survey Magazine's webinar series. The title of today's webinar is the Spring 2015 TrueSample Quality Council Meeting. Today's webinar is co-sponsored by IBM SPSS and presented by TrueSample and Digital Marketing and Measurement, also known as DM2. IBM SPSS Predictive Analytics for Survey and Market Research. For over 40 years, IBM SPSS Predictive Analytics software has helped survey and market researchers achieve a deeper understanding of people's opinions, attitudes, preferences, and behaviors. It enhances predictive models to attain future outcomes and integrate insights with their decision making. Before we get started, I want to review a few housekeeping items and let you know how you can participate in today's session. Throughout our presentation, we encourage you to interact with our speakers by typing in questions and comments using the questions pane on the right side of your screen. We will be collecting questions and comments during the presentation and conducting a question and answer period after today's presentation. If you'd like to join the conversation on Twitter, the hashtag is SurveyWebinar. The Twitter handle for today's guest is TrueSample. We'd love to have you connect with us there and keep the conversation going beyond today's event. Also, we're recording today's session and we'll make a link of the recording available to you within 48 hours of our presentation, and that will come via email. Now on to today's speakers. We're joined today by two esteemed leaders in the research industry, especially when it comes to research and data quality. Mark Menig, CEO of TrueSample, and Chuck Miller, President of Digital Marketing and Measurement, also known as DM2. Chuck Miller is President of Digital Marketing Measurement and is a Senior Insights Executive and Business Owner with expert knowledge of the online industry. A former AOL and Time Warner Vice President, Miller co-founded Digital Marketing Services and later served as Chief Research Officer of USAMP, now known as Instantly. Chuck's specialties include market research and data interpretation, marketing and brand development, loyalty programs, online advertising, social media measurement, sentiment analysis of unstructured data, multivariate statistical analysis, web analytics, BI and CRM systems, tech infrastructure, as a former CTO. That is a big resume. Basically, all things geeky related to data. A recognized online market research expert, Miller regularly publishes, speaks, and leads many research industry initiatives in partnership with TrueSample. Mark Menig was a member of the team that founded TrueSample in 2008, and he brings over a decade of experience in global business leadership, corporate entrepreneurship, and technology innovation to his current role as CEO of TrueSample. He has worked passionately within the business to help it bring it to its current position as the industry-leading independent data quality solutions provider. Mark graduated from the University of Washington with a double major in marketing and corporate entrepreneurship and added a certificate in contract management from the University of Washington Extension School. TrueSample hosts Quality Control Council meetings twice a year and during the spring 2015 installment today. Our speakers, Mark and Chuck, will present the findings from several research on research initiatives that were completed within the participation and collaboration of quality-minded companies around the industry. Today's topics include traditional and non-traditional sample sourcing, our evolving ecosystem, a comprehensive analysis of survey sourcing, platforms, and length, and a sneak peek at an upcoming presentation of TrueSample's and DMT's winning paper from the ARF FOQ2 Dataset Challenge. I'd like to be the first to welcome Mark Menig and Chuck Miller to today's event and turn the program over to them. Now, Mark, the floor is yours.
Thank you, John. I wanted to just first extend a warm welcome to everybody looking through the registration data. It was fun to see a lot of familiar names, people that have been a participant in the TrueSample Quality Council over the 8 years or so that we've been doing this, but a lot of new names as well and new companies. And it's always encouraging for us to see how much the industry continues to care about quality as it relates to respondents and associated responses. It's something that we obviously are very passionate about, and we understand that many of our customers and companies around the industry are as well. And so we love bringing everybody together for these kinds of open collaborative dialogues to move that conversation forward. So today, as John has mentioned, in terms of many of the research on research initiatives that we're going to present some findings around, we also wanted to, for the new folks, introduce you to the TrueSample Quality Council and give you a sense of why it was created and what its mission is. And then we'll also be at the end unveiling the new and improved TrueSample Toolkit for data quality to give everybody a sense of what that is. And then we'll finally wrap up with a Q&A. So as John mentioned, if you have questions, things that you'd like us to delve into a little bit further, you can type those into the chat section, the question section rather, of the webinar control panel. And we'll look to have a little bit of a back and forth Q&A at the end. So the TrueSample Quality Council mission. As I mentioned, we've been doing this for a number of years, and we try to do it twice a year. It was founded in 2008, and it's really a who's who of sample suppliers, research firms, research buyers, really looking at the entire spectrum of the research ecosystem and looking for like-minded individuals that want to participate in elevating the quality and efficacy of online research. So there's three key driving components of the mission of the TrueSample Quality Council. The first being leadership. We really want to make sure that thought leaders that are interested in and are passionate about advancing research quality have a forum in which they can collaborate with other market research buyers and suppliers. The second being that actual collaboration. So providing that forum where proprietary data quality research can be shared and really facilitating in that interaction of industry leaders, allowing us a place to shape the direction of online sample and instrument quality as it continues to rapidly evolve. And then last but not least is impact. We want to make sure that as we're doing what we're doing, that there's a measurable and objective, quantifiable gain in the overall industry sample and research quality. That's really the meat of what we're trying to achieve there, is for the betterment of the industry as a whole and for all of us that really participate in market research and consumer insights. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chuck, and we're going to move right into the actual content of a lot of the research on research findings. So Chuck, with that, I hand it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Mark, and thank you to those of us that are joining today. I'm going to take you through two projects that we have worked on the TrueSample Quality Council. The first of which, if I can swap slides, there we go. The first of which really looked at traditional versus non-traditional sample sourcing. This was something that we did in the fall, and basically we wanted to look at really two distinct types of sampling: traditional email panel, and then everything else. We kind of classified as this non-traditional sample source. One of the primary questions that we really wanted to answer was, even after controlling for demos, do we have attitudinal and behavioral differences between these two different types of samples, and when should you have to consider those? When should those things be taken into account during your design and your upfront work for projects? Really, both from sampling design and then study topic matter. Based on my sample sources, there's something here I need to account for. So in order to do this, what we did was we worked on developing a survey instrument that really looked at lots of different subjects. We looked at lifestyle questions and just general outlook and attitudes that people have. We looked at some shopping behaviors and attitudes. We looked at technology, media usage. We looked at some interest in new product concepts. And then we also wanted to look at survey-taking behaviors. A number of these questions are questions that I've used for close to a decade, and obviously have been updated over time, for looking at sample quality and for measuring those kinds of things. Other questions are pulled straight from ACS and GSS, surveys that are used as really benchmarks for a lot of the things that we do. In polling questions for these, we know that there are timing and method differences. GSS uses interviewers. Anything we do online is doesn't use an interviewer. It's something that those are not stringently benchmarked. It's not something that we want to say, we want to look at a sample source from online, we want to see it match to GSS. It's really just more for curiosity and for comparison, because those are good questions they use in those surveys. So for this study, we had 8 different sample providers that graciously contributed. We had 4 traditional online panels and then 4 providers that we would classify as the non-traditional, people that had access to audiences that engaged in multiple activities online, and survey research was really just one of those. So those 2 different groups of sample contributors were looked at. We looked at a total of 1,800 interviews. Data was analyzed by the 2 segments. One of the things that we did here is we really wanted to take age and gender out of the mix, and so what we did was we weighted our data to reflect the exact quotas that we wanted for our composition, whether or not they were hit. So we really wanted to be looking at the sources themselves and look for any underlying differences. We didn't want some of the things like the ability to hit quotas and certain targets and slight composition differences based on demographics to really factor into this at all. So in general, across most dimensions, the good news is that the traditional sample looks very similar to the non-traditional. It's something that really one of the key things that we found was around technology usage, and the non-traditional samples appearing to be a bit more tech savvy. I think that as you look at the data here, you'll see that that makes sense, that they engage in a lot of activities online and they spend more time online and that sort of thing, probably by nature of kind of who they are and you know, the sourcing that they come from. It's something that for certain types of research projects, you know, that could impact the data based on certain subject matter. So that's something that you'll just want to consider going forward when you think about your sample sourcing and the subject of your survey. Other than that, things looked very similar in terms of lifestyle and outlook and the shopping and brand usage questions, all of that. It's something that one of the things that we found was that there was a bit more variation among the individual providers than the 2 classifications as a whole. So again, it just kind of speaks to knowing your sample, knowing what your method is and your purpose, and kind of choosing wisely. So in looking at these, one of the key characteristics of the non-traditional sources was that they, you know, engage in lots of activities. They do shopping, they're using coupons, they're watching videos, searching and surfing. So not surprisingly, you're going to see that they spend more time online. You know, we did see some statistical differences here in terms of the hours per week between the 2 sources for personal use. And also when looking at social media sites, you know, again, as you might expect, the non-traditional people who are engaged a little bit more in online are using more social media than traditional panels. And I should note that throughout this deck, whenever I talk about there being differences, those are statistical differences as they're tested at 95%. It's something that, you know, as good researchers we know not all statistical differences may be meaningful. What we're hoping to report here a lot of times is going to be the meaningful stuff that we see, you know, determining insight. Next, we looked at different types of behaviors, as I said. We saw, you know, statistical differences on 4 of these 7 items. So, you know, the non-traditional people are definitely more engaged in different types of activities. There was one area where the traditional panels were statistically higher. That was the use of online banking. Again, just something kind of interesting there. And in terms of technology usage and ownership, you know, we looked at the 2, and they really did look more similar than different. If you looked at things like ownership of tablets, e-readers, digital cameras, streaming TV devices, all of that was very similar. There were a few kind of old school technologies where we saw some differences. If we looked at traditional landlines and home telephones, non-smartphones as being a person's mobile device, and a subscription to satellite or cable TV, for the traditional panel, those all came in higher than the non-traditional. So again, just kind of something to keep in mind. And I'm trying to forward, Mark. Do you have control? All right. Okay, and so again, even after normalizing for age and gender, really trying to control for this, one of the things that we did see was heavier smartphone usage than in the non-traditional than the traditional. The key thing to look at here is kind of the frequency of usage of those two devices for personal calls. For the non-traditional sample, we show more people using mobile phones for personal calls. For the traditional, we do show statistically more people using landlines than the non-traditional. So again, not a great surprise. It's something that is interesting, though, that the people that are non-traditional, despite age and gender, may have a proclivity to kind of gravitate toward newer technologies and be heavier users of online and all of that. And again, around mobile phones, something that we noticed was that non-traditional panels use those mobile phones more when shopping. You'll see that non-traditional have about a third of people that rarely or never use a phone, where traditional, it's 51%, so about half. Something that was an interesting difference and may come into play in certain types of work that we do. We're doing a lot more store auditing by mobile, kind of shopper experience work using mobile, and there's a whole group of traditional panelists that aren't used to doing that and aren't used to pulling out their phone in those situations, so that just may be something to keep in mind. So when looking at the device used for taking this survey, what we saw was really more differences amongst the individual providers than the two different sample sources itself. So what you see here are the 4 traditional and the 4 non-traditional, and the percent completing on a mobile phone ranged from 27% to 1%. So quite a big difference there. It's something that, as we're constructing surveys and composing them, something to keep in mind that, I think many times today we as researchers talk about wanting to optimize for mobile, at least trying to keep question text and answer lists shorter. In some sources you may have, over a quarter of people that are completing on a mobile device, so it's something to think about as you're constructing your survey. And then one more thing around technology that we looked at was the browser used for completion of the survey. We had quite a bit of consistency among the traditional sample sources, and the browsers used looked fairly similar to the market shares of the different browsers in use today. In the non-traditional, we did see a couple providers that had considerably high Google Chrome usage, so just kind of something to keep in mind, again, as you're working on surveys, making sure that you're optimizing and relevant for all browsers and all computing environments, but also knowing that the sample source that you choose, may be a little bit different for some of them. And then a few more characteristics to kind of indicate that non-traditional respondents are a little bit closer to technology. When asked about where the primary source of news comes from, about 9% of traditional people said they got news from the newspaper, while only 4% of non-traditional people said that the newspaper was their primary source of news. So, half of the amount of the traditional. In terms of the hours per week spent surfing, again, non-traditional, statistically higher. And then in terms of past 30-day usage of social networks, similar to the other measure, it was statistically higher for 9 of the 15.
Hey, Chuck, I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second because there was a question that came in that I'd rather address now than waiting until the very end. And it's asking if we could provide more detail around the non-traditional sources to aid in folks' understanding of some of these conclusions. So maybe if you could just give kind of the 30-second download of describing those non-traditional sources, not obviously the names of the particular companies that
Sure.
participated in this, but more just the characteristics of those companies.
Yeah. So let me do that. So first think of traditional as being enrolled email panel, right? So someone has established a relationship with a research company or a panel provider. to engage in survey research, and that is the extent of their relationship with that company. The non-traditional goes beyond that. It's something where people are engaging with a web presence, a site, a community of some sort that offers them opportunities to do different types of online activities or engage in different types of elements online for earning rewards. And in those cases, survey taking is just one of a number of ways that people can engage with that community. So it's something that the relationship is not exclusive to research and encompasses a whole lot more. You know, I can speak back to the early days of online research. We were really concerned that those types of things might influence people's research behavior, and we were a little reticent to use sites like that. I think over 15 plus years of evolution of the internet, we know that everybody is doing all sorts of things online, and that we aren't quite as concerned about that. But I think as this research shows, there still may be some differences in certain areas between the traditional and the non-traditional. And so when thinking about your subject matter and the business questions you need to answer, you may need to take that into account. If you're doing something in the technology arena, or something around electronics, it may be that you need to know the characteristics and ask some of these questions so that you can better gauge, does my sample, look more like a non-traditional source where people may be a little more heavily engaged, or look more like a traditional panel where it appears that they aren't as engaged as some other sample sources available. Does that help? Okay. So following up, some of the other non-technology measures that appeared similar, around brands and shopping, this was all good news. It's something that's, as researchers, a lot of the work that we do centers around shopping and behaviors and that sort of thing. So we really didn't want to see differences here, and thankfully we didn't. It's something that, for I think the bulk of that work that is done for marketers, we're in pretty good shape. We also collected some product and service categories for which people were primary decision maker, and most items aligned with one another, and the primary decision maker stuff looked similar. But the non-traditional sample percentages were statistically lower kind of across the board on 5 of the 10 categories. So it was more driven by lower scores for one provider, but it was kind of a trend that we did see across the providers. So that was just kind of a curious element there. That while stated behaviors and attitudes around the way they use brands and buy was similar, there was a bit of a difference in self-reporting for being a primary decision maker. Here you can see some of the measures that we used on this. We had a 5-point agreement scale, and for these types of attitudinal measures, we only saw 2 things that really popped statistically, so that was really a good sign to us. So let's take a second to read those. And you can see at the bottom, one of the things that we do around data quality is we may ask opposites attributes. I'll talk more about this in the next presentation, but you can see the last 2, purchase brand names more than generic and purchase generic more than brand name. One of the things that we'll do in there is look for use of opposite ends of the scale, or look for use of the middle of the scale, similar on that. So this is another way of looking for consistency and quality of data. For the lifestyle and outlook questions, much of this is pulled from GSS. Again, really good stuff here. There's a 7-point happiness and job and family satisfaction questions. There were really no mean differences between the 2 sources. On issues of interest, asking people the different types of things, current events and all that might interest them. A lot of similarities. The non-traditional stated lower for a couple of them. There's some institutional confidence questions and trust, and those were basically the same. So that was good news across all of this. And I think that, the only thing of note is a lot of the measures did end up being statistically different from GSS, but where they were, it could be attributed to interviewer bias and potentially a socially desirable response. Again, GSS has an interviewer. Everything that we do online is self-administered, so it's not unusual that we would find some differences there. In terms of self-reported health, we saw very similar scores across the two different sample sources. One thing that we did see that was interesting, though, was self-reported smoking. Across the board, we saw a lot of differences amongst the providers. In general, we saw the traditional scoring lower than the non-traditional. As you can see, there's one non-traditional provider that reported 39% smoking, and that is over double the CDC estimate. So that's interesting to look at that source. But again, as kind of I stated up front, while we're looking for differences between the two, and that was the initial thought, is to go into this research and try and quantify that. Some of what we saw were items like this, where there's actually more difference amongst the individual sources than you might find across the two classifications. So after controlling for age and gender, there are really just a few demographic differences. The one that's worth calling out is we did see a skew in the traditional panelists toward a higher income. It's something that, again, you may need to take into account in certain situations and based on the subject matter and objectives of your research, but we did see higher overall household income for traditional panelists. And then there were a few more items that appeared different, but these tended to be driven by just one provider. So I would hate to hesitate to say that these are differences between the two segments as a whole. It's really, again, more about differences by provider. So when we looked at it, we did see a higher percentage of retired people in the traditional, and that was really driven by one traditional provider that had a pretty high proportion of retired individuals in the sample. We also saw some marital and divorce differences, again, kind of driven by an outlier in one non-traditional panel provider. So that was something that looked interesting for that one, and it was just enough to kind of bring down the total for that segment. And then I think to wrap this up, just some stuff on survey taking, asking people where they take surveys and why they take surveys. You can see that there are really no intrinsic differences in motivations or attitudes. It's something that people reported taking surveys in the same place and for the same reasons.
I'm gonna jump in with two questions here, Chuck. The first being, folks are wondering, what are these non-traditional sources we're learning about? And the second question being, how do you actually go about accessing these non-traditional providers? So again, as Chuck was describing relative to the non-traditional sources, for the purposes of today's presentation, we're not naming names. We're more naming kind of capabilities and characteristics of those companies, and they oftentimes tend to be online loyalty reward types of communities and things where folks are earning some form of an incentive. It can be a local currency to that particular community. It can be a virtual currency. But the point is mainly that with the non-traditional sources, folks are joining that community to participate in a wide range of activities versus kind of the traditional sources where they're joining for more of the sole purpose of participating in market research surveys. And then as far as how you go about accessing these non-traditional providers, you engage with these folks much like you would for the traditional. There's not necessarily a lot of difference there. You can go directly to them. You can send them RFPs. You can talk with them relative to kind of, answering their SMR questions around sampling. Many of them are equipped to do that now. Many of them are also available in some of the online sample exchanges, and you can actually go in and select some of them and those types of things. So there's not a ton of difference around how you go about actually engaging with them. It's just that their communities were built in a slightly different way for a slightly nuanced purpose, but are still being leveraged for market research.
Yep, that's absolutely right, Mark. And a lot of these companies have realized that, they've got a nice, highly engaged online audience that, and, participates in lots of activities, and they made survey taking one of the offerings there. And over the past few years, have really worked to develop a lot of the standards and practices that we use, traditionally in market research, and may have been used by the traditional providers for the 15 years or so that we've been doing significant online research. So those folks, talk the talk at this point, are available, to field requests, and you'll find many of them presenting at conferences and setting up exhibits in conferences and talking about the differences in the way they do things. Okay, so finally, I think on survey taking, while people are still participating for the same reason and engaging in that same manner, specifically drilling down to how people were invited to a survey is one thing that we saw a difference on. So, not surprisingly, the traditional panels engage a lot of their people from general emails, from survey-specific emails, and so those types of means of engaging, rose above the non-traditional. And for the non-traditional, they found surveys by going to websites and then finding a survey opportunity there. Many times they will engage from within a game that, if you're a gamer, you can be offered participation in a number of different online activities in order to level up or continue to play the game and that sort of thing. And so a lot of the non-traditional people may come from that, or a much higher percentage of those than do from the traditional panels. So when looking at the way people engage in surveys, they're doing it for the same reasons and the same motivations. It's just they're finding them in a slightly different manner.
I had one question come in, Chuck, relative to the geography of kind of focus for this particular research on research that I thought would be good for us to address as well. And correct me if I'm wrong, but this one in kind of phase one was just done in the US. And then we have some thoughts around doing this internationally and looking for any differences that may manifest from one country to another.
Yes, very good question. Probably should have covered off in the methodology slide, but yes, for both of the projects we're talking about here today, they were US-only sample, and we would be looking to do the same sort of thing internationally in the future. Okay, and so I guess this is actually the final slide on survey taking. Just a couple differences. We saw traditional panelists reported, these are self-reported measures, that they had a little bit longer attention span for taking surveys, and then they also reported that they received more survey email. Both of those probably aren't surprising. They're probably more used to taking surveys, and they definitely received more email by virtue of their source. Okay, so I'm going to switch gears here, and in about 15 or 20 minutes, try to get through these next ones really quickly. This other study that we are going to talk about was really a comprehensive look at survey sourcing platforms, links. What we did was we wanted to answer questions around how does screen size impact the ability to complete questions, how do different sample sources perform with surveys of different lengths. So what we did was we created a survey that had a short version, a medium version, and a long version, and wanted to look at some differences there. We wanted to look at the combinations of source, survey length, and device, and see how those things would influence results. And then we also wanted to see what device diversification might mean for data quality today. So respondents were drawn from one of three types of sourcing here. We had what we labeled traditional research panel. We also engaged some people that preferred to be referred to as virtual or managed panel. Basically, some of those non-traditional sources that have been in the research business for a while and manage their community and their access to research similar to a panel. And then we had a third distinction that was more what people refer to as affiliate, sometimes river sampling. It's more of the real-time engagement of people that may or may not have the known and profiled qualities that you might get through those other two sources. We looked at 3 different devices, handheld phone, tablets, and computers, and we looked at the 3 survey links. We fielded this over about a 3-week period, 1,800 completes. We, again, set very distinct quotas because we wanted to control for these different features that we were going to study. You know, there's lots of work that's been done already around who is accessing surveys and how. Younger people are more likely to be mobile than older people and that sort of thing. That wasn't the topic of what we wanted to study here. We really wanted to look at the behaviors by device and the survey treatments and lengths and really hold these other variables constant. So again, we used a survey with a variety of question types. You know, one of the things that we did though is we wanted to keep the rendering fairly consistent across devices. So while we kind of optimized for mobile, meaning we had shorter question text, shorter answer lists, and that type of thing, we didn't make great accommodations one way or the other. We tried to be more reflective of the way a lot of surveys are done today. In doing so, we also used some grid questions. Now, we decided not to use the widest grids possible. We didn't do any 10 or 11-point scales, but we did use some 3, 5, and 7-point scales. Again, because that's the way a lot of surveys are constructed today. You know, people are taking those on mobile devices, and we wanted to kind of see what their behaviors were as a result of encountering that type of question. We used multiple grids in a longer survey treatment to assess fatigue, and you know, again, we looked for consistencies in those opposites attributes. We flagged instances of straight lining and really looked at different elements of data quality through this. So some of the things that we used to classify data quality, we looked at interview length, we looked at concept viewing length, we put a concept question in here, we looked at some answer consistency across questions within grids, we looked at open-end response length and quality. We developed a quality score, and then what we did is we looked at it by various subgroups. We created some classifications for people based on their answers. One of the groups was a group of influentials, people that participated more online and then even offline in different types of groups and activities where they said that they might, you know, share things and influence people more than others. We looked at, you know, social media usage, some shopping affinity, people who liked shopping. We looked at, you know, heavy online users, technology users, and mobile enthusiasts. What we did with this was it wasn't something that it was so much about the definition for that group and how many people met it. It was more about how did the percentage and the proportions of these groups change based on the different renderings of the survey and the different devices. So what you'll see is you're going to see a bunch of indexing here. So once we created the definition for people, we then looked at it, you know, does it over-index or under-index in certain situations. We also asked some factual questions. There were no quality penalties for that, but it was something that not really reporting here, but was kind of interesting to look at. So here's the concept that we use. Go ahead.
I'm just going to interrupt you real quick, Chuck. There was a question as we're kind of digging into, you know, quality and stuff here that I think is worth us kind of putting out there relative to what our opinions of the current trends relative to online quality, fraud, and those types of things are, and what we are seeing and hearing as we talk with folks around the industry. Is it a problem that's solved more or less, or is it more of a problem that continues to manifest but in kind of nuanced ways? I'll let you answer, and then I might chime in with a few thoughts myself.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, it's something that I would definitely say is not solved. It is something that, you know, years ago, I think we used to talk about it in terms of an escalating arms race, that, you know, just as we learn to do something online and ask certain things and, you know, kind of monitor quality in a certain way, people who are attempting to commit fraud would find a way around it. So You know, it's certainly something that we have made great improvements on over time, but you know, it's something that new things and, like you said, nuanced things are regularly occurring. So it's something that's, I think that it's incumbent upon all of us to be just conscious of the surveys that we're creating, how we're engaging respondents and, you know, panelists and all of that, that we want fake surveys, and you know, just trying to keep that whole ecosystem clean. It's something that it takes more than just the sample providers kind of working on it. What did you want to say, Mark?
Yeah, no, I think I appreciate that answer. I think it's right on. There's one analogy that I would share with folks is that, you know, a lot of times we describe this concept of data quality and fraud and risk. It's much like a virus. And when I say that, the reason I'd say it is because it's constantly mutating. And so the challenge is around continually innovating new solutions that can be layered on top of each other to make sure that you're constantly protected from that new form that it's kind of morphed into. The one thing that I'm pretty confident in saying is that there is no silver bullet. There's no one thing you can do. You have to do a layered approach and kind of come at it from different angles to make sure that you are protected and those types of things. And the number one thing I would say is just maintaining the dialogue and the conversation with your suppliers and your customers relative to what you're doing, what their expectations are, and those types of things. You know, as evidence here today, we've got several hundred people participating in a conversation here around some of these data quality concepts. And that's just indicative of a core piece of the industry that really cares.
Yep. Okay, so let's proceed. Here is the concept that was evaluated. May look very familiar to most of you, I would think, the Google Glass concept. You know, interestingly, at the time we've done this, you know, over the last year, I see the percentage of people who are aware that it is actually Google presenting this being, you know, around a third. You know, I think those of us in the industry are all pretty familiar with it, but you know, general day-to-day respondents, not quite as in tune. But it's something that we present the concept, you know, asked a few questions after it around purchase intent and, you know, potential usage, and then this awareness question. You know, in terms of data quality, we looked at the time spent on the page, wanted to, you know, kind of designate a proportion of people as concept skimmers, making allowances for being aware, because if you're aware, I kind of assumed that you might skim it a little bit more quickly. And then, you know, really kind of looking at the levels of engagement with all of this by different segments. As you might expect, the time viewing the concept was inversely proportional to screen size. So those people looking at it on a mobile phone spent a little bit more time. You know, it'll be interesting to do some qualitative later on and maybe find out why, but I've got to believe it has to do with pinching and resizing and being able to read and all of that. So a little bit more time spent on mobile phones. You know, we went through and we kind of classified people as too fast, fast, and other. The too fast being 6 seconds or less. And again, just kind of let the data kind of fall out and show us where those breaks should be. And it was something that, you know, this too fast group was, you know, folks that you can see were predominantly 18 to 34-year-olds. Might not be a great surprise to us, because I think we've known for a while that 18 to 34-year-olds and young audiences tend to provide a little worse data than some of the older audiences. But you know, in looking at this, we saw that the quality score was you know, 2x higher than the people that were age 50 plus. In looking at the lower quality data, people that we designated as that, and the higher quality data, again, not surprisingly, if you were a concept skimmer, you are more likely to provide lower quality data throughout the survey. So you can see kind of the seconds across the bottom here, those people that, you know, are in that 6-second range, you know, a pretty high percentage of them were providing worse quality data. The one finding that was a little interesting to me that I didn't anticipate was, you know, among the people that provided the higher quality data, the good data, the awareness of that Google made glass had little impact on your time spent viewing the concept. It's something that I kind of expected to see two parallel lines here, thinking that people that are aware might spend a little bit less time, but that really wasn't the case. Whether you were aware or not, in general, you kind of spent the same amount of time with the concept. So around this, we asked a provocative open end. This is something that was designed to elicit a strong emotional response, and you can kind of read the setup here for it. Talking about futurists believing that there might be surgical implantation of computing devices and chips and that sort of thing, and first kind of asking an interest question or purchase intent. Gee, when this happens, are you going to be on board to buy the product? There's a lot of people that are ready to be the first or among the first. And then we followed that up with, how do you feel about a future where something like this might happen? And, what we found, was a number of very, emotional responses. What we wanted to do is kind of classify this, based on length, based on quality, and really begin to take a look at, how we can look at open-end text to determine what's a quality response or not. And again, the data, we kind of just let it fall into some segments. And what we found was that, the longest responses were about 51 characters or more. There were multiple sentences, multiple thoughts a lot of the times. Just below that was maybe one complex sentence or two thoughts, somewhere around 26 to 50 characters. We had about a third of people that kind of fell in this 7 to 25 characters, really only expressing one thought. And then the remainder, about 16%, we kind of dubbed low quality responses. Now, of that 16%, about half of those people truly gave kind of a junk response. They said yes, no, they gave some gibberish, they said something that was completely not relevant. But about 8% gave a very short response, but it was valid. So, how do you feel about a future where this might happen? Well, I feel okay, I feel sad. 666, you only live once, 1984, a reference to Orwell. We found responses that people gave that were valid, but they were very short. So it's just something that, as we're going through and we're looking at open-end quality, pure answer length doesn't necessarily get you to where you need to be in terms of designating quality, but this was something that we had to spend a little bit more time to classify as kind of the lowest quality and then low quality. So in terms of response quality, like I said, we created this composite quality score. There were the 8 classifications that we used, to kind of look at this across the different survey treatments. And again, the scores and percentages themselves are less important than really how they changed by the device and treatment. Overall, what we did was we kind of looked at almost the, a little bit more than the lowest quintile, about 23% as kind of lower quality responses. And what we wanted to do is then kind of see amongst this group, how did that change under different circumstances? Not surprisingly, probably, males were a little higher than females. The younger audiences were higher than the older audiences. And interestingly, by education level, some of the groups that appeared to be best were, the groups kind of in the middle of the education spectrum, the, completed high school and studies after high school, and then as you, again, proceed up the ladder to completing master's degrees and beyond, you may not be as good a respondent as a kind of a respondent as some other folks. When looking at the different types of segments and classifications, you can kind of see a breakdown here of how it indexes for the different groups. Shoppers appeared to provide the better data. So here, an index of 100 is average. A lower score means better data. A higher index score, as you will find down here, is worse data. So, amongst the best groups were, kind of those that were the shoppers. They may be a little bit more attentive to market research surveys because they like the subject matter. At the bottom, people that were the tech laggards, maybe not a surprise, but the tech enthusiasts, people that were really into technology, also provided some of the worst scores. Another thing that I found interesting was that the influencers, it's a group of people that we as researchers say we really want in surveys, didn't necessarily provide the best data all the time. Here's some indexing by demos. The one big call out here is that anyone that answers prefer not to answer tended to have worse quality data. I don't know if that's a function of those people, if they're not going to provide that information, aren't necessarily going to take their time and provide good information throughout the survey, but that was a consistency that we saw. And here are some of the scores by treatment. I want to kind of wrap this up. All of this will be available in the materials, and you can look at it in length. But, you know, again, the proportion of lower quality stuff, you know, relative to time spent in the survey, you know, is along the path that you would expect. You can kind of see it here by the short survey treatments, the medium survey treatments, the long treatments. Across the treatments, the totals, as you can guess, in the longer survey treatments, there's a bit of fatigue that would set in, and lower quality would be more prevalent. Amongst the sample sources, these people that aren't as engaged in survey on a repeatable basis, those that may not be as conditioned to survey taking, potentially, gave a little bit lower quality data. Interestingly, by device, our tablet data was the best. Our phone data wasn't too bad, and there were a lot of people on PCs that, you know, really just weren't kind of conscious of quality as the others. You know, here are some of the survey combinations. Again, tablet stuff is best. You can take a look at this in more detail. And here I could spend a lot of time going through this slide. Let's leave it to say that, you know, these green groups provided the best data. The bottom groups provided the worst, and this talks about the different combinations of device and length and the things that you might look out for potentially when needing to interview these different audiences. A few more items, you know, in terms of OS, Windows was the only one that had significantly more people, lower quality data. Those who answered actual questions correctly provided better data. That doesn't necessarily surprise me. We didn't dive too deeply into that. Interestingly, kind of the best combination of everything that we measured was a short survey completed on a tablet among females with a shopping affinity. That group, in that condition, tended to provide the best data for us. Some of the practical takeaways, you know, certain subgroups are going to be more predisposed to providing poor quality data. So as you think about those different subgroups and your subject matter and your audience and your target for surveying, you just might take into consideration, you know, do you need to create your survey a little bit differently to ensure higher quality data? Faster survey taking was definitely correlated with lower quality data. Faster concept viewing, the same way. Interestingly, slower concept viewing was not an indicator of lower quality data. I kind of thought that it would be, you know, certainly the faster intuitively makes sense. I also thought that people that might take too much time might be indicators, but that wasn't the case. And then, as I said earlier, the prefer not to answers, those people that aren't going to engage in your demos probably aren't engaging and providing great response through the rest of the survey. You know, this is research that we're going to continue to do in the future. We'll add some longer grids. We'll spend, you know, we'll record time being spent on the grids. We'll, you know, get to longer survey treatments because the longer survey treatment we did, I think, averaged only about 20 minutes. It was something that it wasn't as long as many of the surveys we do today. So we may take that out a little bit further. But, you know, it's something that's we'll want to test more sources going on, and we'll just really work to understand, you know, representativity of samples. It relates to a lot of the different devices and those sorts of things. So, Mark, I'll turn it over to you and let you tease the upcoming presentation we have.
Yeah, thank you, Chuck. I appreciate all that.
Yeah, so for everybody that has joined us today, this is more just an FYI. Chuck and I will be back at this again in a couple of weeks at the ARF's Rethink conference in Manhattan. We're going to be digging into more depth around identity validation in particular. Kind of what is it? Why does it matter? What are the benefits? What are the drawbacks? What are the things to watch out for? Helping kind of folks understand that not all solutions are created equal. There's really some things to pay attention to there relative to how an identity validation is being conducted, not just that it's being conducted. Give us folks a sense of kind of what's the difference, what's a good identity validation solution, what's bad, understand a little bit of the science behind that type of thing. How do you find which ones? You have to discard several before you select the one that you ultimately choose to move forward with. There is a white paper that you should see on your screens now. Contact TrueSample afterwards or at any point, and we can share a copy of that with you free of charge. The best way to do that is to either send us an email on our website, on our Contact Us form, or you can just send us an email at info@truesample.com. The things that we were going to look at, we wanted to replicate some of the identity validation analysis that was originally done as part of the Foundations of Quality 2 initiative that the ARF did in collaboration with a whole host of providers, suppliers, and buyers around the industry. We did end up revising that slightly based on what data was actually available in this data set of upwards of 70,000 completes across 15 to 20 or 25 or more types of different sample suppliers and those types of things. We really wanted to understand the differences between folks that had their identity validated versus those that could not have their identity validated, and understand their resulting response quality, and if there was anything that we could learn and apply to what we were doing as a result of that. So you'll see us there. We'll be on stage during the Rethink conference, so if you're attending that, feel free to come by, check us out. We'll make that presentation available afterwards as well, and it can most likely be put up on TrueSample's website and available to download for anybody that is not able to attend the event. Last but not least, before we completely wrap up here, I did want to introduce everybody on the call to the toolkit and kind of unveil TrueSample's new data quality toolkit. We don't just do this research for the fun of doing the research and making Chuck talk for a long time about all the findings. We really believe in linking the evidence that we uncover in the research on research to the actual kind of ability to execute on higher quality within our research and within our consumer insights. And so we organize all of our solutions to identify things that can be done and applied before, during, and after your research process to kind of lift your overall quality and confidence in your data all across the board. And we do that in a variety of different ways. So you can see this is the new TrueSample toolkit. For anybody that's been familiar with TrueSample over the years, this should look very different to you than what you might remember about TrueSample and all the different standalone solutions that we offer now, ranging from device fingerprinting, multi-device fingerprinting, understanding as consumers are adopting more and more internet-enabled devices, how do we manage and measure that behavior and protect against it? Looking at online risk and fraud, email deliverability, identity validation, appending data as needed to further augment your understanding of individuals. All of this in-survey stuff that we've been talking about, response quality. And then the one in the bottom right-hand corner there I wanted to call out because this is the newest offering that TrueSample will go to beta later this year, towards the middle of the year. And this is where we're going to be actually automating all of that kind of open-end quality that Chuck was talking about in that second presentation. So where we'll be able to offer an API that will automatically read, clean, and give you a sense of the quality score associated with your open-end data. So John, with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you. I don't know if we have time for much Q&A. Fortunately, we were able to answer a few as we went along the way, but I will turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Chuck. A very good presentation. I really appreciate it. And I think you're right, Mark, that I think that we were fortunately able to answer a lot of questions during the presentation, which I'm sure are helpful. But we are running near our time limit, so we do have all of your questions, and we will be sure to get a response out to you directly with the questions that we weren't able to answer on today's event. But we also want to let you know that today's event was co-sponsored by IBM Business Analytics. And to all of the attendees, we'll be receiving an email that will alert you to an on-demand status of today's event. It'll be an email with the presentation as well as a recording. On behalf of Survey Magazine and our guests, Mark and Chuck, our co-sponsor is IBM Business Analytics, as well as the entire team contributed to the Spring 2015 TrueSample Quality Council. My name is John Lehman, and we wish you all a great day. Thank you for attending the presentation.